I know you're having a lot of fun. I'm going to go ahead now and tell you, if you gave me your phone to take a picture, don't blame me, please. I was very excited when Dawn finished, as you all were. And I tried to do my best, except for my elementary group right here. They were so nice to me. They said, how about moving away from the door? Instead of being like us high school folks, hey, that door's not going to work, get out of that light over there. But again, you all just inspired by Dawn's work, and we're going to continue that. You know, and I've even heard some of you all reflect with me about what's going on in your schools, and you're talking about those pockets of excellence with STEM and how you plan to expand those pockets of excellence to reach all your children. I want to take a moment before we have our next presenter come up. State Department people, if you're from Alabama State Department of Education, would you please stand? If you're from the Alabama Department of Education, would you please stand? Thank you all. I know there are more, but I think they may be out and about. There they are back there. Let's give them a hand for coming to support us. Very good. I didn't look at the back. All right, you've heard about STEM. We've flown, we've taken a flight. We're going to continue that flight, and we have a gentleman from our corporate office, Mr. Scott Davidson, who's going to tell us how to put it all together. Put it in a box, wrap it up, take it home, unwrap it, and you will be ready to go. Scott comes to us today, former classroom teacher, school administrator, political science background. I was reading his bio last night, and I saw he talked about reading old novels and selections, and I saw Ulysses in there, one of my favorites also. But Scott, get ready to come on up and be ready to talk to us about advanced that STEM certification and how we put it all together. Let's give Scott a round of applause, everybody.
Good morning. Is this good back? Volume's good? Great. Andre, we're going to talk later because first you put me on after the astronaut, and then also you're making promises I have no way of fulfilling here. But thank you so much for the introduction. I was going to start with a moving personal story, but that plan has changed. So we're going to get right to it this morning. But it's such an honor to share this space with you all as colleagues in education, and specifically in STEM education. And what I hope to accomplish in this hour together with you today is to talk a bit, not just about STEM certification, but your goals for STEM implementation and how Advanced Ed can help you and support you in that continuous improvement process for STEM implementation. So you might be setting STEM certification as a landmark on that journey, sort of like looking down from the 200-mile view, saying, boy, certification would be a great recognition program for us. But I don't want you to think of that as the end of the journey. I want you to think about that in two ways. First of all, STEM certification is a recognition of a sustainable implementation, whether that's a program or whether that's a whole school model. And secondly, it's a recognition of quality. But that isn't to suggest that we're the last word in those things. And so we would invite you, if our certification process is attractive, certainly join us in that journey. But there's so much more to talk about and to engage with than just the recognition piece. So I want to talk a little bit about that certification today. But I want to start, before we get into the what of the certification, with a little bit of a why. Now, if you've got the, bag, and in the bag I think there's some directions on CVent about how to get materials. However, if you didn't get one, this is just an alternative way of accessing the materials. So if you want to snap a photograph of that with your device, if you don't have a way of getting into CVent, that's just a different URL. But what you'll find there, in either way that you get that information, is a copy of some of the slides from the presentation today. I think the most pertinent ones, if you're taking them back to your team and talking about STEM and STEM certification. Next, you'll get a connection to our indicators, so the 11 indicators in our STEM framework, which we'll talk about collectively, but not one by one. And then you'll also get some information about what next steps to take. So if you like what you hear and you want to take our STEM placement guide, that's the first step, and we'll talk about that more in just a moment. But I want you to take a personal moment, think to yourself, how do you define innovation? What does innovation mean to you? And I just want you to take 30 quiet seconds. If you want to make a note of that, that's great. If not, just internalize it, and we're going to come back to that. But I want you to take just a moment to think about how you define innovation. In the program today, you may have seen my job title, which says Director of Innovation at Advanced Ed. I don't know how that sounds to you, that sounds more important than what I do. And I just want to clarify that it is more important than what I do, because innovation is a big idea, and I don't direct innovation in our organization because we have the wonderful privilege of working with all of you and other institutions around the world. The innovation really comes from you all, not from us at Advanced Ed, but I have the privilege of working on a team that thinks about the new products and services that would best support our network. What that means for STEM is that for the past 2.5 years or so, we've worked with schools implementing STEM to learn from those schools. So when we think about the why behind STEM implementation, I want to set the stage a little bit, and I have some images I'm going to show you in just a moment. I love thinking about the future and what will the future look like. But if we rewind back to the last time that our nation was really invested in STEM education and driving STEM education, when would that have been? In fact, our Dr. Thomas alluded to it. When was the last big push where we all worried about science education? So we had a nation at risk, if you remember, sort of back in the 80s, about the products of our educational system. And then prior to that, we had the space race, right? So I want us to go back, all the way back there in our minds, back to the late 1950s, early 1960s, to look at about 60 years ago at what people thought the future might look like. And I captured some images from a futurist and illustrator named Arthur Rodabaugh. He wrote a column called Closer Than You Think, and he did hundreds and hundreds. I just chose a few today that I think would resonate with us today. Now, he was off, he missed a lot of things, but there were a lot of things that he sort of captured that you look at today, 60 years later, and say, wow, you kind of got that right. So here, whether you can see this or not, this is the automated factory. So the idea of warehouses where you don't necessarily need people to go and get your inventory, your merchandise, and send it out. Do we see anything like that today? Any word jump to mind, any company? Amazon, yeah, Amazon. Now, you may have heard in the news, Amazon is looking for its second headquarters, and everyone's racing. Where's that second headquarters going to be? You think about the impact that Amazon is going to have on a local community here in the next 5 to 10 years, that new headquarters, and how they're already changing our expectations about our consumer lives. I ordered, in fact, the bag that I have today, I ordered from Amazon last week. Guess how long it took me to get that bag? Less than a day. It was to my house the same day. That's only made possible through innovations. Here, this is hard to see, but if you notice the folks in the car are having a lovely conversation as they're driving across the interstate system there, and no one's driving it. It's a self-driving car. We're not quite there yet, but another company probably jumps to mind when you think about self-driving car. We're almost there, right? Google is working on a lot of negative press about that, but also some positive press. This one's also maybe a little bit challenging to see, but here you might note the cord and then have some outlets. Got the electric car, right? And so 60 years ago, they were thinking about the power and the promise of electricity and clean energy. Okay? The name Tesla jumps to mind when I think about electric cars. Last one that's sort of industry-wide. This one's hard to get what it means, but they imagined 60 years ago that we could harvest meat like we harvest plants in a factory farming system. Now, those of you with an agricultural background, if you've looked at the changes over the past few decades, we're already at the factory farming vision that they had then. We're not quite to the point where we can grow meat out of the ground, but you may hear about some innovations with meatless meat, right? In fact, in California right now, some researchers have already put this product into restaurants, and I was reading yesterday about a pilot study that was done, a blind taste test, where most of the participants could not differentiate between the real meat and the meatless meat. I don't know if these were vegetarians or people that eat hamburgers on a regular basis, but I can't wait to try one, so we're getting there. Now, you think about ways and innovation and the way that these things are impacting the work that your students will do in the future and what the future might look like. This was 60 years ago, people were mentioning this. Let's take our viewpoint now into school and think about how schools changed over the same course of time and what the vision of the future of school looked like. So this is home, and we can see little Johnny sitting at the desk doing his homework. He's got a TV instructor. He's got an electronic notebook. Isn't it fascinating how The innovations were right there, but the scope and scale of things were different, right? We're all into now personal devices. So we look at that big desk and say, oh, that's very funky. I just got my laptop. But the idea of the functionality of it is right there, right? So we think about flipped classrooms, think about the idea of students being able to access tutors that are at a distance, and we're almost there. One more look. This is a classroom of the future. Each student has, again, their large desk terminal. But I wanted to capture something that it said. It says, special machines would be geared for each individual student so he could advance as rapidly as his abilities warranted. We have a term for that now. You know that term? Differentiation, personalization, right? We're kind of far from where that is. And I think the orientation of the classroom, those of us that are working now in project-based spaces of collaboration might have a bone to pick. But the idea about personalizing instruction was there 60 years ago. So I want you to think about this. I want you to find a thought partner. We'll use this structure a couple times, and then I'll yell when I'd like for us to come back together. Or I might clap, I don't know. How many elementary folks do we have in the room? Good, we can clap then. I'll clap later. Just want you to talk at your table or with a thought partner for the next minute or so. What has been education's greatest innovation in the past 20 years? Why 20 years? I graduated high school about 20 years ago, so a very self-centered question. What has been education's greatest innovation in the past 20 years? Take about 3 minutes.
That's great. 20 years ago. When I was in high school, I'm just thinking my son's born in 95. And my oldest there was 99. I mean, he doesn't remember a time when I didn't have a cell phone. I got a cell phone when he was 7 months old. He doesn't remember a time without.
Yeah, because back then it was like Nintendo, little small devices, Atari, you know.
They don't remember a time without technology.
Yeah. I remember being in high school and my computer was a punch card computer. I'll tell you all about it. We'd sit there and we'd push this, and punch a hole in a card and come out.
That's what my dad did.
Oh, wow. I was mine.
I remember taking it to art class and having to stack the card.
Yes.
Run up through the sheet to get your data.
Yeah.
No, and the girl in front of me, and she started crying. She just sat down and started crying. And I just held on to my hands as I could. She should have made me just
Oh, wow.
I knew better than that card. Not exactly.
Yeah.
But you don't mess with the card.
And then it was like, it came out on this big paper that had holes on the end.
We would go, stepping on the restroom, we enter all my data in one area. I had to walk all the way down the hall to get my printer.
Yes.
Yeah, and it was the size of a
And I was just saying, the computers that you had took up whole, like the base of it was a whole classroom of big machines.
The building
Yeah, like how small this processor is.
I mean, and honestly, I have the new iPhone 8. It has a better camera than mine. Good camera does iPhone 8.
They got me into this last technology we have in our hands.
Yeah.
I mean, that's amazing.
of it here.
I
That's
will
all it
betray the
is.
fact that I have no rhythm at all.
Dropped
and
the
to see
package
that
off.
already about me. So if we could come back together, that would be great. If I have a volunteer who'd like to do a rhythmic clapping, that's cool too. Next time we'll try that. I've got a volunteer. Thank you so much. And by the way, let's clap a little more. A round of applause for that. So let's just share out a couple. Anyone in the back just want to share, just shout it out. What do you think? And try to put in a word or two. I know that's a challenge, but talk about some innovative stuff in education.
Globalization of professional development.
Okay, globalization of professional development. All right. Great, one-to-one or every student with a device. Others?
The way we teach, a lot of direct instruction.
Moving from direct teacher instruction to student-led learning. Great. Technology. It's a big category, absolutely. Well, I want to start thinking about how we define innovation in terms of STEM implementation, because I would argue that whether we look at professional development, student access to technology, philosophically the way that some teachers approach classroom instruction, that as a system, our education system has not shifted as much as the rest of our society has moving into the 21st century. Now certainly we could debate that a bit, and I would say there are pockets of practice that are exemplary for 21st century instruction and learning, but we're not quite there as a system yet, in the way that our business world is there as a system. And that's an important why. So just 3 ideas. This is not a comprehensive definition of innovation, but I hope some of these things overlap with your perspective. First of all, if you're implementing STEM in your school, I think that you recognize that the term STEM is a trend, okay? Now we're talking about STEAM. I've been to STREAM schools. I've been to STEAM's schools. I've been to STEM's schools. I've been to all different types of variation. And the fact is, no matter where I go and what conversation we have with which teachers, a lot of the same types of practices are there, right? And so STEM as a term is going to morph and change and go away. What you want to make sure does not go away is the systemic changes in your school that you were trying to affect to improve the learning opportunities for students. So, if we think about something like phones, okay, everyone's got a device today. How many Nextels do we have in the audience? No Nextels? You used to hear those chirps everywhere, right? That was a bit of a trend, right? And we had the trend where you do things to manipulate the shape of your phone. We had flip phones. I love my flip phone, by the way. It's my Samsung flip phone. I still have it in a drawer, my favorite phone ever. The little slide phone things that we did, well, that's gone away. But phone companies, developers like Apple now and Google, the innovation has continued. And I would use that as a metaphor for what you're doing in your schools. Even when things pass out of favor, like the term STEM, you still want to make sure that you have continuity in what you're doing for your students. And so it should be that you are innovating to solve a problem. That's the second point here. And some of those problems are unknown right now. We just looked at, I think, some great data that says in the future, we may not know what types of jobs are available to our students, but we know by providing them certain learning opportunities, we're preparing them for that uncertain future. So in thinking about future casting, that's about getting out into your community and understanding from the business perspective, what is it that my students need to know and be able to do to be successful in their future, right? So it's not reacting necessarily. And we do that a lot in education, right? We're reacting. In fact, right now, to be honest, and let's be honest with ourselves, a lot of our STEM implementation is reacting to something. It's hot in the market. Someone told us we should be doing it, right? Instead of thinking about what are we doing to make sure that our students' futures are secured. And that's a natural piece. It's a natural part of what we do. We sometimes have to shift those beliefs to just get to the right place. And then finally, this is important. What's the difference between something that's innovative and something that's harebrained, right? Hindsight, right? So we think, that was a dumb idea, but it just as well could have been very, very innovative. But what you have to do, and I love the example of what NASA does in terms of inputs and outputs, is we don't see all of the inputs that go into that system, right? We get a news blurb, we catch the images, we see the people, the heroes. But when you start thinking about a film even like Hidden Figures, it starts talking about some of the other roles that are there. You see all of those inputs that go into a very effective and innovative system. So as you're building your STEM programs, what you've got to think about is what are our inputs and how do we measure what it is that we're doing so that we know whether or not it's effective. If we're saying our STEM implementation is going to impact our student test scores, there's a big gulf between those two things and a lot of gray area in between. What are the changes that are incremental that we need to see to know whether or not we're doing something innovative or whether we're doing something that's not working? And a lot of times in education, we get trapped by the wrong measures, right? We're trying to affect something down the chain and we don't understand what our logic model is for that. So I would just invite you to think about these ideas and moving toward innovative approaches and designs. And what we want our STEM framework to look like and to support is transitioning not because our market says we need more STEM workers, but because our world says we need more STEM thinkers in order for our kids to be successful, if that makes sense. And there's a distinction I'll get back to toward the end, but it's an important distinction. What we're setting up is redefining a system so that it actually functions in today's society. Moving from, I had a great conversation, I'm sorry, sir, with Casey. And Casey mentioned, you know, one of the biggest innovations we've had is moving away from that old factory model of education where we really need to program our students to behave a certain way to be successful in certain environments. We haven't fundamentally changed in a lot of places the way that we approach that. So this work is about that systemic change to support us in this century to help our students be successful. So the question would be, okay, I get it, I get the urgency, but Advanced Ed's an accreditation organization, right? What are you guys doing with STEM? Well, it turns out that as we're having conversations with our network, a lot of people are asking us the question, what does it mean to be a STEM school? I drive by, I see on the marquee of a school building, STEM school. What does that mean? A couple of years ago, our answer was, it depends, or I don't know. And so we were asked to create a framework that would build some consistency in, and what we wanted to do is really two things. First of all, there's a lot of investment right now into all sorts of different programs and practices. I come from a state where there's already a state STEM certification. Many states are adopting that model. You might have in play many different sets of standards around what STEM needs to look like in different disciplines. We don't want to bring to you any framework that says, stop using the things that you're using. Stop using the things you've invested in. We want to embrace you're using what fits the context of your school and environment. And so we wanted to create a framework that wherever we went in the world, we work in 70 different countries, people would understand the practices and behaviors that we were advocating. Not to say they're easy, but to say that they didn't necessarily negate anything that people are working with, the constraints that you have. Just by show of hands, how many are implementing the next generation science standards? Anyone doing that? A couple? Oh, I see some hmms. We'll talk about that a bit later. But one of the important pieces there is around the behaviors that people are engaging in, both teachers and students, and how they're beginning to shape the way that the classroom looks. And that's the important thing. So we're not going to tell you what standards of mastery you have to use because Advanced Ed is not a state organization or an organization that works across all states in the nation. So we can't confine that. So we want to provide a framework for STEM. And the second thing we want to do is we want to help to create a network of STEM practitioners. Okay, so that schools in Alabama can reach out to schools anywhere in the Advanced Ed network and say, you're a school like mine, what does this look like? How are you doing this? How are you answering these questions? So that's really our mission-driven approach to STEM, is creating a consistent framework for folks in our improvement network and building a network of STEM-specific practitioners. So as you are thinking today and you're looking at our STEM framework and saying, wow, that's a lot, how do we go about doing that? You've got some great models already in the room here. And you have some great models throughout our STEM certification network, so we can connect you with those at any time you're interested. If you took our 11 indicators, I'm getting to the what a little bit, and you consolidated them into some big ideas, what's the STEM certification for Advanced Ed all about, I would capture it this way, and I believe this image is in the downloadable resource that I provided. I just want to take a few minutes to talk about when Advanced Ed says STEM certification and their STEM framework, what is that all about? So I would first turn your attention to the learning space, so the classroom. This is the hardest thing to change if it needs to be changed for a system or a school. And I would encourage you to talk to anyone who's doing this effectively, and I think they would echo that sentiment, because this means that you need buy-in, but you also need changing behavior. behavior. So it's not just people saying, yes, I believe in those ideas, but it's people actually enacting that in classrooms every day. And if you're a school-wide implementation, almost all of your classrooms every day. So that inquiry learning process is really about helping students become the people that are doing the thinking and the work, the cognitive work, right? So it's getting back to that student-centered instruction. The next piece is integrating that STEM curriculum. One of the challenges is, especially when I go into secondary schools, we see a lot of silos put up around STEM disciplines. Yes, we've got science. We do math. Yes, we've got engineering. We've got technology. Are those pieces working together in concert to give students a cohesive experience? When I talk to non-educators, this is easy for me to say, but it's really difficult in front of educators because it doesn't work. But I sometimes ask people who are non-educators, when you go to work, do you think, now I need to apply my math skills, now I need to apply my technology skills, now I need to apply my design skills? And most people can say no. Teachers, because you teach content, can say yes, and then it's ruined for me. But think about your students moving into the workforce, right? The way that we present education and learning experiences is fragmented. So more and more, we want those seamless experiences for students that are job-like experiences. And that leads to the final circle here, the real-world connection. It is absolutely vital as schools are building their programs that they are reaching out and building a pipeline, a network of practitioners and community resources so that students have the opportunity to take what they're learning in the classroom and apply that in the context of how STEM practitioners do it every day. So even if you're in a space, I come from a very rural area that doesn't have a lot of practitioners right there, you need to look at leveraging technology, look at other ways of building those partnerships and that exposure for students, because it's very important for them to have that aha moment. We just heard a great example of an aha moment from a kindergarten student, a first grade student, who was looking out the window, and that passion drove an astronaut from the age of 5 or 6 all the way through multiple layers of defeat to reach an ultimate dream. When we look at our kids, and this is what I do, I always think about this kid. How many of you as teachers had that kid that you just couldn't reach? Show of hands. I can name you 10 of them right now without even thinking much more about it. Because every year, those are the folks I reflect back on and say, what could I have done different? But I want you to take that student in your mind right now and ask yourself, not only do I know what their passion was, but did they leave my classroom or my school with the skills to persevere all the way up to age 40 to follow the dream that they had? That's an amazing opportunity that we have to start building on students' interests and passions. And it's easy to get there through STEM, but you've got to connect it to something meaningful, for students to make that relevant learning. So if we captured our sort of buckets of STEM philosophy, this is a lot of what it would look like. But I want to take you into our standard and indicators a little bit and give you some context for what we have in this framework and why it's important in shaping the system that we work within in education. So this is our STEM standard statement. I'll just give you a moment. I know at the back it's maybe a little challenging, but I'll read it to you in just a moment. So STEM students have the skills, knowledge, and thinking strategies that prepare them to be innovative, creative, and systematic problem solvers in STEM fields of study and work. That sounds a lot like college and career readiness, right? And that's getting a bit ubiquitous and maybe even a bit cliche today. So we start talking about readiness and then we start saying, well, what does that even mean? How many of you had the conversation in your district about what readiness looks like for you? Has anyone had that conversation? I hope that everyone is. What does college and career readiness look like for us? So let's just take another second because we're going to ask this twice. But right now, today, for your students, what does that look like? So just take a moment with that same thought partner. We're going to do this in a minute, and then I got my volunteer. We're going to come back with a clap in about 1 minute. So do it quickly, 30 seconds each. What does it mean to be college and career ready?
Ready to go into college or to go to into some type of different field. So make some successful college and career. I like it. So I want to have to talk about it. I don't know how many years yeah, they can put that on there. I was excited when I was going to fix my hair when it was straight, but I was like, I need to get there early. Yes. I like that.
Yeah.
Yes. I love it. They might have yeah, it's on the, it's the MTBOS, MTBOS, hashtag MTBOS, or something like that. I'm just now for the first time since the first, not hacking and popping my head off.
See what I'm saying? I mean, that to me is going to be so important to do it so they can justify. How do you do that activity? Glean from that activity and that you go to that real life.
Threw us off a little bit. Let's try it again.
When I put my fist up, that's when you go.
I am glad that I'm not alone among the rhythmless here today. So thank you all for your show of support. I deeply appreciate it. So some of the numbers from the back might be challenging to see, but let's just take this line of thinking here in the state of Alabama. We have somewhere in the neighborhood of 2/3 of our students moving on either to a 2-year or 4-year school. Okay? Of those students, 93% are attending public institutions, and 91% of those students are staying in state to go to school. Okay? So you have an awful lot of students moving into higher education. Now you've got about 1/3 of your students who are not participating in higher education, at least not at the point when they graduate in the first 2 years after graduation. That's what this data tracks. So, what do you think the success rate in terms of completers are for those who pass, for the 2-year and for the 4-year? If you don't know of the site changetheequation.org, they give you some great statistics for all the states, and excuse me, for the STEM climate in general. Good folks, this data comes from changetheequation.org. And so on the left here, you can see at the top our completer rate for 4-year programs. By the way, we won't get good broad data sets again, and I think this year we'll get some good data sets because it takes about 6 years of lag time to do the research and follow up. So you can see here what our completer percentages are. What's happened recently in the U.S. is we've gotten some promising data back around high school graduation rates. Did anyone see that story come out? I think it was last year and a half ago, about our highest graduation rate in history, 83%. And the question we have to ask is, what does that mean? Some people are saying that we're watering down graduation. I would point to a different data set to disagree with that. If you are a person who works in counseling departments or you work with broad scale ACT or SAT data, our participation rates for those assessments are the highest they've ever been. For the past 30 years, our performance is flat. We have a slight decline in SAT scores, but with so many more students participating in the assessment, if we were really watering things down, where would you expect that data to go? Down. But what you hear is, this is a funny thing in the media is, oh, we're not improving. The question you have to ask yourself is, how do we measure improvement? So what's happened is not that our system is broken, because you'll hear students in the US behind international students when it comes to things like science, math, and problem solving. But there's great research that's been done by different researchers, I like the work that Gerald Brace did before he passed away, that shows the top performers in the US perform right with the top performers in any other nation in the world. But there is a giant performance gap between our top performers and our bottom performers. That is true if you look at a state or our entire system. Our highest performing states perform with any highest performing groups of students throughout the world, but our lowest performing students in states do not. And so the story isn't about US students, it's about learning opportunities for students across the board, right? And so when we look at information like this, yes, we're graduating students, and by the way, this is not, I'm not picking on Alabama, this is true of any state that you visit. You can see the national averages, and there are about 4 states at the top that pull that average up, and then Alabama with Georgia and a lot of the other states are at the bottom, right? And so this is true when you go across the US. So we're graduating students, but are they ready for that next step? So I want to ask a follow-up question. If we think about the year 2030, because that's when a lot of our students who are entering school now are going to start thinking about college and career, what's going to change about readiness? And is our system prepared any better than it is today to help students be ready for college and career moving forward? Which begs the question, what is it that we need to do to help our students be college and career ready by 2030? Because can we wait until 2030 to start thinking about readiness in 2030? That starts really a while ago. And many of you right now are starting to do that. But that's some of that why our STEM standard is written the way that it is, because we have to start conditioning our system to be ready for our learners when they get out into the world. And right now, objectively speaking, we aren't doing that for all of our students. Right? Let's jump into our first 5 indicators. I'm not going to break those down individually, but this data is also this. If you go to change the equation and look at every state, this data is very consistent for every state. So again, I'm not picking on the state at all. This is what it looks like in most places. In fact, I've been to 4 different states to talk about STEM this fall, and they've all had very similar data. But you start to look at things like poverty indexes and racial demographics, and you start to see performance gaps become very, very stark. So this is performance in math and science. So the students, sort of the bright green, are not eligible for free and reduced lunch, and then you see free and reduced lunch eligibility. You see those performance gaps. And this data implies that the gap is widening over time. Okay? Then you look at the 3 largest demographic groups by ethnicity in the state and performance. Now, you all have an interesting system for system accountability in the state, which is now going to be the report card. Is that correct? Am I wrong about that? And I have those system report cards? So what if we overlaid this data with what that report card system would look like? What do you think it would happen? If we looked at systems and we said A through F, and we said poverty, minority status, what would that data look like? It would look like this. I just want to give you just a moment to process. Now, and forgive me, but I looked at one of the major newspapers, perhaps from Birmingham, and they actually looked at all systems in the state last year and said, if the report card system was in place with the data that they have, here's what the grade would have been. What I did then is went to the state DOE's website and pulled the data for poverty status and minority status and just made a table out of it. So the caveat here is that's assuming the newspaper was right about where the state's systems would be. I'm assuming they did an okay job with that. But this is not statistically probably as valid as I would like. What do you notice? Mathematicians in the room? Who are math folks? Really? Are you afraid to admit it, or we only have one math person in the room? No one's enemy. We're friends here. This is about STEM. Okay. Notice that as we move from A all the way to D, and I didn't put the information because there's only one system that would have been enough. What kind of relationship, if we look at our variables, do these show? It's a linear relationship, right? So as we change one variable, the other variable changes both in opposite directions. So what this means is that our assessments are doing a great job of telling us what predominantly 2 things: where a student lives by zip code and what parent backgrounds are. And that's the largest effect size when you start to look at components of student testing. So what we need to do, not saying throw away school accountability by any means, we need to start looking differently about the impacts of what we're doing in school. That's why we need a framework for understanding STEM implementation. Because when you just go to test scores to say, is STEM impacting test scores, as I said, there's a lot in between here and there, right? So we gotta start looking at some different dynamics. So what our first 5 indicators look at, the very first one is equitable access to STEM learning opportunities. Okay, that's our very first indicator for a reason, because that's what the data shows we need to work on the most. Second is building inquiry classroom environments. So inquiry-based, so project-based learning, opportunities for students to think critically and problem solve. We have an indicator that addresses the role of the student and the role of the teacher. So teachers are facilitators of learning, and students are guiding and leading, where appropriate, their own learning pathway. That's our third indicator. Opportunities for students to engage with technology and digital tools. Now this is important. I know in a lot of one-to-one implementations, sort of the device becomes the central conversation piece. But what we ask at Advanced Ed, and you know this, if you've seen Elliott, and my colleagues at Advanced Ed Alabama have permeated the state with Elliott trainings, have not been to one, shame on you, but Elliott tells you in Environment G, it's not about whether a student is holding a device, it's what are they doing with the device that they're holding, right? So we're not just talking about the existence of technology, but are students building marketable skills toward the future and utilizing technology. Let me give you a very stark example. I've been into schools where I walk into the high achiever track, and they are doing dynamic things with coding and website development. And I walk into the next classroom, into the normal track, and students are typing their paper on a word processor. Now, not to suggest that either one of those in and of themselves are poor examples of the use of technology. Both are important. But who's getting the more marketable skills for the future? And what does it say about our expectations for students in those classrooms? So again, it's not just do we have technology, but it's how are we using it and how are we making sure what we're doing with it is impactful for these students' futures. The final indicator for this cluster is about performance assessment. And that gets right back to that data piece again, right? You need something to complement your standardized data sources that tells you about what are we doing in our STEM-specific learning that's helping these students to move forward and develop STEM literacy, okay? So that's our first cluster, and it's all about the learner. It's all looking at learning experiences and who our learners are and making sure they have equitable access. But teachers are also, educators are a very, very important part of the STEM implementation conversation. Now, many state certification frameworks look at things like teacher certifications and teacher credentialing. We do not do that, right? It's not negative if you have great teacher certifications in your school for additional pieces like STEM areas, but we're not going to look at that as an evaluative criteria. We're actually looking at what are the practices educators are engaging in to benefit student learning experiences, okay? So looking at, and I don't know if you've seen the framework for the Next Generation Science Standards, I think they paint a very important picture about the opportunities that teachers need to develop the skills that it takes to be a great STEM educator. So a few of the things that teachers have to be able to do, we got to give them time to be able to work with colleagues to hone their practice. So you start looking at things like opportunities for educators to collaborate as interdisciplinary teams. That's indicator 7 in our framework. Guess who has a lot of trouble finding time for teachers to collaborate? Which level of school? High schools, secondary schools. Still very much siloed. We're still looking at ways of saying, can we collaborate without having people in the same room at the same time? We start leveraging technology to do some digital collaboration. And what is it that teachers are doing during that collaborative time? It's not that we're in the teacher's lounge hanging out. By the way, every school that I go to, here's what happens. When I sit down and talk to the teachers about when they collaborate, I'd say it's 80-20 informal collaboration to formal collaboration time. Does that make sense? Because teachers are always working on improvement. They're always talking to the person in the classroom next door. I got recess duty, I got lunch duty, I got off time. It's not to imply that teachers don't collaborate. Institutionally, we're not building structures that support teachers well enough. The other thing that teachers have to be able to do is they've got to engage in professional practices that are aligned to STEM practices that inform their work in a non-evaluative way. So in other words, they need someone to watch their practice and support them developing practice without the threat of you're not doing it right. We've got to build those safe environments where teachers feel comfortable not getting it right. I have never met a more anxiety-ridden group of people than a room full of teachers because we want to do it right. And if we don't, we feel very uncomfortable that someone's watching us do it wrong, right? But we've got to break down that wall and help people develop the time to do that. And that happens a lot through peer collaboration, through reflecting back on lessons or activities and saying, what went really well and what did we have some challenges with? So those professional spaces where teachers are really trusted as professionals to do their best is very vital and very important. And the other thing, teachers need to understand discipline-specific instructional strategies. So you think about how much time we've spent implementing reading across the curriculum. What if we did the same amount of effort in science across the curriculum? Engineering across the curriculum. We're doing better with technology, we still have some work to do with technology across the curriculum. Those pieces are very important. The data I always go to on Science and Math Teacher Experience is put out by Eric Banelauer. He does it every few years. And this is the most recent survey data from his studies. And it shows how infrequently teachers have the opportunities to develop the kind of skills that we say are important for them. So first of all, in his study, you look at elementary grades and it's around 22 minutes of science instruction a day. I go all the time into schools that have 90-minute literacy blocks, and at the end of the day, they read a little science book and say that was our science, right? Is that science? How many science teachers are in the room? I hear from secondary science teachers all the time. The kids are coming to us without the foundational skills and science inquiry that they need so we can do the work we need. Because you all love blaming elementary teachers, right? Elementary teachers, I know who you blame. You blame the preschool teachers and the parents. You know what I'm thinking, but that's fine. It's always passing the buck. Then the higher ed don't even get started on what they say about it. But I'm only joking. Just kidding about that. But the point is, we need the opportunity for teachers to be lab science teachers if we're going to truly embrace teachers being STEM teachers. And we don't do that often enough, according to what teachers say. When we think about the professional development, there's tons of data out there that says you need, on a particular topic, to change educator behavior X number of hours per year, and it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 40 or more hours a year on the cycle of PD, not just sitting in a session, but the cycle of PD and coaching to just change a single teaching behavior. The percentage of teachers who have gotten their discipline-specific professional development over the course of time isn't where we need it to be. And then finally, when we think about collaboration for teachers, I think that's one of the most important pieces. And when you look at comparisons like Jim Stigler's work around what different countries do and the different practices they engage in, the thing that looks very different about what teachers in the US do is we don't collaborate nearly as often with our colleagues as teachers in places like Finland or Japan or even in some other places like Singapore. Teacher collaboration is seen as kind of an extra rather than being a core practice, right? All our core practice is considered being in the classroom in front of your students. I just think about it this way. Not to say that I'm a good public speaker, but if I came to you having been given the amount of time that most teachers have to prepare for a given lesson, I wouldn't feel prepared. Think about on Sunday, assuming you attend church and you go and your pastor spent that much time preparing for the message for everyone. The pastor would feel very underprepared, but yet that's our expectation of teachers. So those things are what we're advocating for in those indicators. So it's very, very important that we embrace the opportunities for educator practice to develop, not that we're evaluating what are teachers doing wrong. I want to make that very, very clear. We're about supporting teachers developing those practices. And then finally, if we think about what does the real world connection look like? What are the STEM experiences students need to have inside the classroom on a daily basis? They need to be complemented by those experiences outside the classroom, not as frequently, but fairly frequently. So this is just, I love this survey. It's called Falling Short, and it's by the Association of American Colleges and Universities. It asks college seniors and employers from the top 100 companies employing freshly graduated college seniors, what are the things that you are looking for people entering the job force, okay? So this is just an example of the experience-based learning that both of those groups say would be valuable. But when you look at a survey of folks hiring, what are the skills that they say they want their students to exhibit? You just shout out a few. Soft skills, an example. Teamwork, collaboration, what else? Perseverance and grit. We heard a great story of perseverance and grit. Problem solving, critical thinking, the ability to craft an email that does not offend your colleagues. There's a cliche that goes around about the writing competency of engineers. Have you heard this? That engineers can't write. That's a myth. But that's prevalent out there. People tell me all the time from engineering firms, we really have to focus on our writing and work on that with our new hires because that isn't emphasized. So the folks in the humanities who say, you're leaving us out of STEM? Absolutely not. I'm a humanities person by training and by experience. Absolutely not. Humanities are vital to effective STEM. But what you have to do is you've got to show students examples of those things. Because when you talk about the importance of collaboration, hearing it from your teacher is one thing. Having that astronaut come into the school and saying, you know what, if those 7 people on that space shuttle didn't work together and didn't have their job and do their work, not only would they have not completed the mission, chances are they wouldn't have survived. When your dream is here and you see how these things are relevant to your dream, then I'm doing it. You know, it runs out. The ability for a teacher to tell you what to do and you to do it, is that maxing out younger and younger these days? My kid's 6 and he's already like, no, I'm not having it. But I don't know at what age the teacher stops being the hero, but I know it happens sometime before they get to college. And so you've got to think about, how do we bring in these community connections and these real world experiences that help students understand what it looks like? That's the important key in building that network within the community. So our final 2 indicators, indicator 10 and 11, are about building partnerships and building structures for students to interact with STEM practitioners. Very, very important part, so you can't do it in isolation within the context of the school work. So that's our content. Process is easy, because we want to make the process easy for you. So I want to talk a little bit about our process. The first thing that you would do, let's say that the STEM framework for advanced ed is attractive and something you'd like to pursue for your system or your school, you'll go to our STEM website, okay? Or you can use the information that I shared with you to go to our placement guide. There's a few survey items for you to fill out. You turn that in, it will be collected by the folks at Advanced Ed Alabama office, and they'll return to you an email or a phone call to say, hey, following up, we're glad that you're interested, let's talk about where you are and what you need to do. You submit an application to us. There's nothing binding if you're a member of the Advanced Ed Improvement Network. For you all that are currently in districts that are accredited or schools that are accredited, if you're there, no charge. You just turn in the application and we'll give you access to a free online course that provides all the information that you need to facilitate the process, which begins with an internal review. So we give you a team workbook. It takes all of our 11 indicators, breaks them down by performance levels to give you look-fors in your school. Here's what we're looking for, here's what we're looking at. You will start the process of saying, at an institutional level, have we documented our practices in a way that we could show these to an objective evaluator and they can validate what we think we're doing, okay? So whether I'm a level 2 or a level 4, I know that I've confirmed where we are with each indicator. When you feel sufficiently comfortable, and we'll talk about the targets in about 30 seconds, then you're going to invite Advanced Ed in. We're going to have 2 team members come to your school. They are trained team members. At least one of them almost always has some background in STEM education, and one of them almost always has some background in STEM, in advanced ed protocols and processes. So it's a complementary team that we try our best to match to your school context. They're going to conduct some interviews. They're going to have administrative leadership conversations, and they're going to visit your classrooms. Okay? After that 2-day process, you're going to get your findings there with your administrative team in the moment. You don't have to wait for anyone to confirm that. We tell you there, you've either earned the certification or you're not quite ready yet. Within 30 days, you're going to get a final report, and if you've earned certification, you get a lovely letter and certificate that you can post proudly somewhere or not. That's up to you. You can put it in a filing cabinet if you want to, but that's the process. Easy stuff. Our cycle is 5 years, so your certification is good for 5 years. Okay? Get a little bit of detail for you. So what are the requirements? I already mentioned this. You are a member of the Advanced Ed Improvement Network, and that you have had STEM implemented in your school for at least 2 years. That doesn't mean that it has to look the same over the course of the 2 years, just that you've been implementing STEM in a way that you can document for 2 years. So that's how much data at minimum we would want to see when you provide your presentation of evidence to us. The internal review and presentation of evidence consists of writing an executive summary. That's the overview of your program. For each indicator, there's a narrative supported with artifacts. And you provide that presentation of evidence to us in a digital format. Okay, so you can make a website, which is my preference. There are free website generators out there, so you can use them. You can turn it in Google Classroom, Office 365, but a digital format that can be shared with your review team. You will interface with STEM lead reviewer, and they'll work with you for about 6 weeks up to the point of your review. What you're targeting is, for the 11 indicators, an average of 2.8, with no indicators rated as a 1. What's important about that is, we're not striving for perfection, because as I mentioned at the top here, our process is not about you being perfect when we visit. It's about you having sustainability and quality. So you will get a mixture of opportunities for improvement and powerful practices, and we hope to engage with you in that process of continuous improvement. So please don't feel like you need to be at all 4s before you give us a call. You certainly do not. However, we do want you to be at a certain level, making sure that you don't have any indicators at a level 1, so you can't earn certification if you do. wanted to, this is in the materials that I shared, but if you said, I don't want those, this is what our 2-day review will include. By the way, I think you know probably already that you have access to Elliott, so if you're confused about what is it that they look for when they come into our classrooms, you have the tool, and then in our online course, it has a page devoted to here's what the observers are looking for when they come into your classroom. We align which indicators go with which Elliott items to show you specifically, here's how we'll use that. Just to give an example, in our advanced ed network of accredited schools, this is from Elliott 1.0, in case you've seen the new version, this is data from that. This represents about 56,000 observations. This represents about 2,000, so I don't want to imply that we're comparing equal data sets because we aren't. But in every item of Elliott, there are statistically significant differences between accredited schools and STEM-specific schools. And on 29 of 30, they have the higher average in STEM schools, okay? So why is that important? It's important because we're already beginning to see those systemic shifts in schools that are implementing STEM and moving towards student-centered learning environments. We're already seeing the evidence that we're making those changes. That's a very, very important sign. I know I'm a bit out of time. I want to make sure you have time for your break and get set up for the next concurrent session. But I would leave you this idea. The future for our kids, and even myself, I don't know at what age I will be able to retire. But the fact is, as we move forward, our students are going to be in the workforce for a very, very long time. They may have 3 or 4 different careers by the time that they're ready to retire. What we are doing right now is not preparing them for the reality of the world right now. What we're doing is preparing them for the reality of the world moving forward. It's different. It's a shift in thinking towards what will the future look like. What I would encourage you to do is in your community, start thinking about what you need the world to look like, because that's what your school needs to look like. We would love to join that journey with you. Again, if you've seen something that you liked from us, feel free to contact me. My email is connected with the materials, or certainly Advanced Ed Alabama is an amazing resource for you to reach out to. But thank you so much. Have a great rest of the day. We will have a couple of STEM sessions here in this room after lunch to follow up. So there's one about our indicators specifically, and then I'll be back for some questions and answers if you've got some implementation questions of your own. But I appreciate you being here, and thanks again for the opportunity. Have a great day.
All right, before we go to our sessions, we have some special presentations that we want to do. We have our second high school in the state of Alabama that we're going to recognize now that just became STEM certified. Mr. Parrish, I know I saw you here. Would you come on up, please, sir? And Mr. Davis, will you come on up, and your team? I want all of you all to come up. I know some of you all from Winfield now. Don't be shy. We have something that we want to recognize, you know. Okay, let's see here. All right, we have a. All right, here. Okay, now you teachers, you ladies, tell us what to do, please, and how we need to get in here, please. My wife does it all the time. I'm used to it. All right, I have a special letter, first of all. It's from our CEO, Dr. Mark Elbart, and he wants to recognize you, Mr. Parrish, and your staff for a job well done. Personalized letter for becoming STEM certified for high school. So let's give them a hand, you all. Okay, I want to make sure that, let me just point out something. Let me get my glasses because I've just been corrected. They are the only, when I say only high school that's STEM certified school-wide and not program, because there's a difference, which you'll learn later on, that you can certify a program or you can be school-wide. And he is school-wide, so there's a big distinction. That means everybody had to come on board. And being a former high school English person, I don't teach science. I'm not going to interrupt it. But he had to get everybody on board. So again, let's give them a hand, you all. I got one more thing. Also, I'm just going to use my teacher voice. Also, you all get a nicely framed certificate that we do want you to hang and not put in a filing cabinet, okay? All right. And one more thing, Mr. Davis. And superintendent, come around, please, sir. This is unique to all. We'll get the money back. When Winfield High School became STEM certified, that meant that all of their schools within the system was STEM or were STEM certified because their elementary school and middle school were already STEM certified. So we got to doing some research because Mr. David, Dr. David asked us, he said, no, we the first system in your advanced ed network to be certified with all their schools district-wide STEM certified. I was like, I'm not answering that question. I've just been on the job since July. Been a former superintendent too. We're very careful how we answer, by the way, anyway. So we did some research and we found out quickly that they were. In the state of Alabama, I mean, we represent the whole world, as you heard Scott say. So throughout our network worldwide, Alabama, our state, has the first system to have all of its schools STEM certified. So let's give them a hand. In the words of my boss, Dr. Jeff Wooten, people, that's huge. That's an honor. So our CEO, Dr. Mark Elgart, personalized a letter to you, Keith, I know him as Keith, Dr. Davis, to let you know that you are the first system in our network to have all your schools within your system STEM certified. And we got it, and you know what? You have it in writing too, okay? It's even framed. But what an honor, you all. And I had an opportunity to visit their schools. And you know what, Keith? As a former superintendent, I see some superintendents, I see some principals in the room. You may not hold this distinction long, okay? They're gonna be coming after you all. But let's give them a hand. Congratulations again, you all. We're so proud of you all. Thank you. Yes, we're so proud. Yeah, thank you. All right, you all. Congratulations again. Job well done. We're getting ready now to go into our breakout sessions. I hope you decided. It's been hard for me because all of them sound so good. But I hope you decided where you're going to go. Once you finish your first breakout session at 11:15, then you'll come back here and 12:15, I'm sorry. At 12:15, thank you. These elementary folks, they're keeping me together, and I appreciate it. At 12:15, we'll have lunch in here. And boy, I've already heard that it's going to be good. And I'm used to going through the line first, but I've been told I got to go through the line last. So again, thank you all so much. I think it's been a good conference so far. Wouldn't you all agree? Yeah. Learn a lot of good information. Let's go to our first breakout. I'll see you back at 12:15.